Now in Live on Live this Thursday, I'm joined in the studio by the Africa Report's managing editor, Nick Norbrook, for our monthly meeting on what's behind the stories coming from the African continent. Nick, as always, very happy to see you in the studio.
Terrific to be here.
It was going to be Marshall van Velen who was going to fill in for you, but finally you were able to make it yourself.
Absolutely. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Thank you very much. Well, and look, we're going to have a look at this month's edition, should I say. And as we're coming to the end of 2017, there's very much a look ahead at what 2018 might bring for countries in Africa. And that's specifically really in the frontline section of this month's edition. This is the kind of thing that I love seeing in printed publications towards the end of the year. It's all of the nice graphics about what could be in the future, looking into the crystal ball. And in all fairness, this month's edition of the Africa Report does not fail to deliver. Starting off with the flashpoints to look ahead. There are 8 in total, but there is an overall synopsis that we start with in the report about the AU and trying to really manage the crises that are on the continent, failing in the CAR, they're pulling out of Somalia now. But there are 8 countries. I'm not going to list them all, but in your opinion, which do you think of those 8 is going to be the one to look at in the future in 2018?
Well, as you say, we, at this time of the year, opened the cupboard right at the very end of the office and fetched the extremely dusty and often inaccurate crystal ball and wheel it out and, give it a bit of a rub and have a look inside. And I mean, goodness, it's so hard to tell. But certainly, the DRC will be a critical country next year. How they manage this next 12 months, they've kicked the election until 2019, but I would not be surprised if we see things starting to unravel before then. I think Nigeria's, the Sahel perhaps in general, maybe that encompasses a bunch of countries that are really worth looking at, but certainly Mali, certainly, Chad, Nigeria's north, the border with Cameroon. I think all that is going to be
Of course,
hot.
we have the Biafran issue that's really to the fore, as well as what's happening up north with Boko Haram. And of course, we have the Niger Delta Avengers that have to be dealt with. And you have a very interesting points to make on that Nigeria. Since the mandate of Buhari began, let's say 2 years ago, it's kind of been a stop-start really process because A, his illness, and B, because him being a northerner, the old way of doing things with Niger Delta militants, it didn't really go forward the way they looked at. So they put really kind of just a plaster on it. They've kind of put a Band-Aid on it to try and keep it down, but that hasn't actually healed the wound.
Well, what's really been noticeable, I guess, in the last 12 months in Nigeria, and is certainly the reason why it's come out of recession, is that they have managed to patch up things with various groups in the Delta to get the oil flowing again. And so they're almost at their peak production levels now, which is, considering where they were, great for the country. Even if you might want to wish the country to diversify and grow other sectors of the economy, at least now there is some cash in the system and they can start paying civil servants, etc. But the thing about Buhari's sort of presence or not presence, weirdly, when he wasn't there, things were going a bit better in the Delta.
Ticked along nicely with
the vice president has a relationship now with some of the governors. Bajo, the VP. He went down to the Delta, and from having spoken to a few Delta governors, Delta region governors, in the last few months, they're all kind of impressed with him. They, he took them seriously. He understood that what they wanted was, much greater economic investment and diversification away from oil, and really just, paying attention to the infrastructure and, as well as all the environmental challenges. So he went down quite well in the Delta, and that obviously translated into a downtick in violence. Now Buhari's back in charge. We're actually seeing the violence levels creep up.
Well, that's it. The divide is still there. But also now let's kind of move away from West Africa. And of course, we have to look at East Africa. We have South Sudan, which is basically the festering wound and the newest nation on the planet. You have Somalia, where we have African Union troops that are pulling out. And you have the authorities, you have Formaggio himself that's saying, well, we're not ready yet. I mean, what's going to happen now? What vacuum, or what should I say, who's going to fill the vacuum if the AU pulls out of Somalia, in your opinion? Can we see the Ethiopians coming back in?
Well, I think that it would be great if any kind of, well-organized security force came in, I think that vacuum will probably rather attract ISIS fighters who are being flushed out of their very final strongholds in northern Iraq and along the Syrian border.
They're all coming down.
They're heading to Libya, but a big chunk of them will be looking at Somalia. Just yesterday or the day before, Trump authorized a drone strike which killed 100 Somalians. Just to say that those kinds of things are starting to really
the drone
take off
strike.
again.
Well, the drone strikes now over in the past 3 or 4 weeks, they've been very regular, specifically at weekends, 3, 4 here, there, and always citing an unspecified number of militants have been killed. So they really know who they're targeting here. I mean, that's the other question. But
I mean, there's been there's just some very fantastic reporting. I think it was in the New York Times Magazine about the huge human cost of the war in Iraq and all these. So we get this every time with these targeted, precision clinical strikes which only take out militants and no children on civilians. And the true cost, civilian cost of the US presence in Iraq is suddenly coming out. I would be very surprised if the picture was any different in Somalia, sure. And I would suggest it probably is worse. And
of course, looking into that dusty crystal ball that has to be brought out of the back of your newsroom every year, we have to mention the biggest story possibly for Africa for this year, and that is, of course, Zimbabwe.
Yes.
I mean, this is a great time of change. This is, the potential flashpoints. We have the incoming president, Mnangagwa, who is due to be inaugurated tomorrow. But what could happen? This is all so fresh. There are celebrations on the street, and I'm saying, well, this might be a little bit previous here. Mnangagwa was, for 37 years, very much Robert Mugabe's right-hand man. You have it listed as a flashpoint. What do you think might happen there?
Well, I think the euphoria is very important because it communicates to the army and to Mnangagwa that this isn't just a palace coup. I think this is the most important point. The amount of people who rallied last Saturday to shake hands with the army, but also to say, we have been, in the streets, all this flag protests, these very, very well organized street protests that Zimbabwe has seen over the last 24 months. Suggests that this isn't a palace coup, and the army and security services would be making a mistake if they thought it was. Egypt, there was a lot of optimism post-Arab Spring, and we've seen the security services step back in almost seamlessly. El-Sisi
sure.
has sort of re-established control. I don't think it will be the same in Zimbabwe. Now, that may, as a result, cause flashpoints, because the street and the opposition may say, well, listen, we are part of this process, whether you like it or not. And, the more reactionary elements of the security services may want it just to be business as usual, but with their new guy at the top.
Now, moving away from the flashpoints, I mean, it's a very, very, concise kind of ensemble of things that are in the magazine this month.
Very good crystal ball.
I really enjoyed it. But also when you look ahead at elections, and of course, bringing back there were various elections going to be taking place in Africa next year. We have Egypt, Mali, the DRC, if it ever happens, probably 2019, South Sudan. How is that going to take place? The instability in the country is just not conducive to having any free and fair elections.
I'm going to nominate you as an observer, Dave.
Well, I would like to do that. I would definitely take that up. It would be an Africa Report observer, an AU reporter, an EU reporter, or just an RFI reporter, I don't know, or observer. But Zimbabwe, of course, is also going to be due to hold elections in July or August. Will they be able to go ahead, do you think? If it all depends on the next 6 months, does it?
I think they would like to. It would make sense to give legitimacy to Mnangagwa. Yeah. I think he would like to go to the polls. I just, it really now depends, not so much on Mnangagwa as on the opposition. Zimbabwe 5 years ago, it would have been a different story, but Morgan Tsvangirai is not the force he was. He still has a lot of support.
But he's physically also ailing as well.
He is ailing, exactly. So if he were to stand down and allow a younger, dynamic opposition leader to be the figurehead of a new Zimbabwe, I think Mnangagwa would have a serious run for his money. And
any chance of a split within ZANU-PF over the next 3 months, the interim period, do you think? We're running out of time, but what do you think? Or is it still pretty cohesive, do you reckon?
Wherever there is patronage, there is cohesion, and for now Zimbabwe still, the ZANU-PF still very much controls that. They also control money going to the civil service, which is essentially where they get their votes. So I guess that there might be a personality clash. A lot really rides on whether Chiwenga, the army chief of staff, decides that, hey, he wants to hang up his car keys and go into politics. You know, if that happens, then I think ZANU-PF could absolutely
Have
see
a lot of trouble.
Yeah, some serious trouble.
Well, it's a pleasure, as always, to have you on the programme. Nick Norbrook, Managing Director of the Africa Report magazine, thank you very much for being on Paris Live PM today.
Pleasure.